The dog hit the door before anyone could stop it. Room 718, Iron Ridge Medical Center, 11:47 p.m. A Belgian Malinois, 80 pounds of combat-trained muscle, blood matting its left flank from where a security guard had caught it with a baton, stood between the man on the bed and the 6 people trying to reach him. Its teeth were out. Its eyes were flat and certain in the way only working dogs and soldiers get, the kind of stillness that means I will not stop. Armed security had the hallway locked down. The charge nurse was on the phone with the director. A physician had already retreated to the elevator. 3 grown men in uniforms were deciding whether to use the catchpole on a decorated military working dog, while its handler, a veteran nobody in this building truly understood, lay strapped to a gurney with restraints that should never have been applied. Then a young woman in scrubs pushed through them. Blonde. 29. Nobody's idea of a hero. She walked in alone, closed the door behind her, and said 2 words. The dog sat down. Every veteran in the hallway, and there were 4, staff and patients both, went completely quiet. Before we go further, if this story already has you holding your breath, I want you to stay with me until the very end. Hit follow so you don't miss a single part. Drop a like if you believe people like Emily deserve to be seen, and leave a comment telling me the city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. Emily Carter had transferred to the Psychiatric and Trauma Recovery Wing of Iron Ridge Medical Center on a Tuesday in early March, which was, by most accounts, the worst possible day to arrive anywhere new. The wing was short 2 nurses. One of its attending physicians had just gone on indefinite medical leave, and the charge nurse, a woman named Darlene Hauk, broad-shouldered and 22 years into a career that had made her certain about nearly everything, had already decided by Wednesday morning that Emily was a problem. She's too young, Darlene told Dr. Prentice Varga at the nurses' station, not particularly quietly. General med to psych trauma is not a lateral move. She doesn't have the instincts for it. Dr. Varga, who was 63 and deeply tired of most things, looked up from a chart. She transferred with strong evaluations. Evaluations don't tell you if someone's going to freeze when a patient goes physical. Darlene set down her coffee. We had a floater last spring who had perfect evaluations. Locked herself in the supply closet for 40 minutes. Emily heard this from 12 feet away. She was logging into the medication cart terminal and did not look up, which Darlene either didn't notice or didn't care about. She was used to being underestimated. She had been underestimated by people with a great deal more authority than a charge nurse in a mid-size hospital in Redstone, Ohio, and she had learned, through a particular kind of hard experience, that the best response was usually to say nothing and do the work. What Darlene Hauk and Dr. Prentice Varga and the rest of the Psychiatric and Trauma Recovery Wing of Iron Ridge Medical Center did not know. What Emily had not told anyone, because she had not been asked and did not volunteer things, was that she had spent 4 years as a U.S. Army combat medic before nursing school. 2 deployments to eastern Afghanistan, one to northern Iraq during a period that was not, officially, supposed to involve the kind of operations it involved. She had a combat medical badge and a commendation she kept in a shoebox under her bed, and a particular quality of stillness under pressure that other people sometimes found unsettling without knowing why. She had come to Iron Ridge because it was close to her mother, who was recovering from a hip replacement in Redstone, and because they were hiring, and because she had wanted, for once, to work somewhere nobody knew anything about her. It had been working out exactly as she'd expected. Logan Hayes was in room 718 because he had no other options, which was something nobody on staff seemed to understand or particularly care about. He was 44 years old, formerly a master sergeant with a special operations unit whose name did not appear in his medical records. It appeared instead in a series of classified documents that Iron Ridge Medical Center had neither the clearance nor the inclination to request. He had been admitted 8 days ago following a series of incidents, his intake paperwork described as erratic behavior and potential threat to self and others. Language that had been written by an ER physician who had spent 11 minutes with him and found him non-communicative. He was non-communicative because he was in crisis, and because crisis for Logan Hayes looked different than it did for people who had not spent 15 years doing classified work in places that made Afghanistan look like a warm-up. What the intake paperwork did not say was that Logan Hayes had 3 Purple Hearts. that he had pulled two wounded operators out of a collapsing building in Mosul while running on a broken ankle in a lot of controlled fury, that he had been recommended for a Distinguished Service Cross that had been quietly set aside because the operation it was connected to officially never happened. What the paperwork did say was that he had a dog. The dog's name was Ruger. He was a Belgian Malinois, 6 years old, trained by the 341st Training Squadron at Lackland and deployed on 4 overseas rotations alongside Logan before they'd both come home with damage that didn't show up on x-rays. Ruger was listed on Logan's intake paperwork as a service animal, which was technically accurate and also entirely inadequate, in the way that calling a surgical team some people with knives is technically accurate. Logan had refused to be separated from Ruger at intake. The ER physician had noted this as a behavioral concern. Nobody had noted that Ruger, by the observable evidence, was the primary reason Logan hadn't completely come apart during those first 48 hours. By the time Emily arrived on the wing, Ruger had been in room 718 for 8 days. The hospital director, a man named Warren Aldgate, had been building a case for removal since day 4. Emily's first shift on the wing started at 7 in the morning. She was given a patient load of 6, of which 5 were, by the notes in their charts, in stable or improving condition. The 6th was room 718. "I'd leave that one for Dr. Varga," Darlene told her at handoff. "He doesn't respond well to new people." "What's his history with nursing staff?" "Refuses interaction, monosyllabic when he does engage. Had an incident with the orderly who tried to take the dog's food bowl." Darlene looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. "There's a dog in there, a large dog. I want to be clear about that before you go anywhere near it. I saw it on the chart. Has he been evaluated by the trauma team?" "Dr. Varga has attempted twice." A pause that had a specific texture to it. "Logan Hayes is not what I'd call a cooperative patient." Emily looked at the chart for another moment, then closed it. "I'll take him." Darlene's expression said she thought this was a poor decision. She did not say so out loud, possibly because she had already done enough of that for one morning. Emily knocked on the door of room 718 twice, then waited. This was not standard procedure. Standard procedure was to knock once, announce yourself, and enter. She waited because the file indicated Logan Hayes had hypervigilant startle responses, which meant that an unannounced entrance could trigger something that would be bad for everyone, and because she had enough experience with people in that particular state to know that the knock-wait-knock pattern was sometimes recognized as non-threatening in a way that a single knock wasn't. She did not know if Logan would recognize it. She heard the dog before anything else. A low sound, not quite a growl. Awareness, not aggression. "I'm your morning nurse," she said through the door. "I'm coming in slow. I'm not bringing anyone with me." A silence. Then, "Doors unlocked." She went in. The room was dim. Logan had the blinds turned to cut most of the light, and he was sitting up in the bed with his back against the headboard, not lying in it the way patients usually were. Military rest position, back supported, feet reachable, hands visible. She clocked this in about 2 seconds and adjusted how she was standing. Ruger was on the floor between the door and the bed. He had gotten up when she knocked, and now he was watching her with the focused, evaluative attention of an animal trained to distinguish between people who were threats and people who weren't. His tail was not moving. His ears were up. Emily stopped just inside the door. She didn't reach for anything, didn't advance. She let him look at her. "He's going to want to smell you," Logan said. His voice was rough with disuse, but there was nothing confused about it. "Let him come to you. Don't put your hand out." "Okay." They waited. After about 30 seconds, Ruger took 3 steps toward her, stopped, inhaled deeply in her direction, and then, slowly, his tail moved once. Logan's expression shifted in a way that was small and significant. "He doesn't do that," Logan said. "Do what?" "With strangers. He doesn't—" A pause. "He's been on edge since we got here." Emily crouched slowly to put herself at Ruger's level. He let her. "He's been working without a break for 8 days," she said, "in an unfamiliar space with unfamiliar people who are nervous around him." She looked up at Logan. "He's doing his job. He's just tired." Logan stared at her for a moment. "What did you say your name was?" "Emily Carter." She straightened up. Can I check your vitals? He was quiet for a beat that was longer than it needed to be. Then, yeah, go ahead. She moved to the bedside table and picked up the pulse oximeter. She did not make him hold out his hand. She waited for him to offer it. He did, after a moment, and she clipped the sensor on without comment. His resting heart rate was 94. High for a man his size, not surprising given the context. You were a medic, he said. Not a question. She looked at him. Way you move, he said. You're checking environmental factors before you check me. You stopped where you could see both me and the door. He tilted his head slightly. Not psych training, field training. She could have deflected, could have given him the mild professional non-answer that most medical staff defaulted to in situations like this. Instead, she said, 4 years, 2 Afghanistan rotations, 1 Iraq. Something in his posture changed. Not dramatic, a centimeter of tension leaving his shoulders. Which unit? 68W. 3rd Brigade Combat Team out of Fort Stewart. He was quiet. Then, you're not what they sent last time. No, she said. I'm not. She went back to the nursing station and updated his chart with her assessment, which was careful and clinical and contained nothing about the conversation. She noted that patient tolerated morning assessment without incident. She noted that the service animal was calm and non-disruptive. She scheduled his medications for the correct window and flagged that the current restraint order, which had been placed by a physician who hadn't seen him since day 2, needed review. Darlene looked at her chart update with an expression that could have been surprise or skepticism or both. How long were you in there? About 20 minutes. He let you do a full assessment. He let me do vitals and a brief verbal check. I'd like to request a formal psychiatric evaluation with someone who has trauma-specific training. Darlene's eyes narrowed slightly. Dr. Varga handles this wing. Dr. Varga's notes indicate 2 failed attempts at patient engagement. I'm not criticizing him. Logan Hayes has a specific presentation that responds to specific approaches. If we had a trauma-informed psychiatrist, I'll pass your concerns along to Dr. Varga. Darlene's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Anything else? Emily looked at her for a moment. The restraint order, she said. It's outdated. The patient is not presenting as a physical risk. I'd like it reviewed today. I'll note that in the chart. I'm flagging it as a clinical concern. A beat. I'll note that in the chart, Darlene said again, with the specific inflection of someone who has decided that a conversation is going nowhere and has stopped caring about the outcome. Emily went back to work. Okay. On her 3rd day, she got the first indication that something larger was happening in the background. She was documenting in the hallway outside 718 when she heard Warren Aldgate's voice from the wing director's office at the end of the corridor. The door was not fully closed. Liability concern from the moment he came through that door. An uncontrolled animal in a patient ward. Marcus, I don't care what federal regulation you're citing. She kept typing, didn't slow down. Board wants it resolved before the Joint Commission review. Remove the animal. We can address the patient's treatment plan separately. She finished her documentation and moved on. That night, she pulled Logan's records more carefully than she had before. Not the nursing notes, the original intake documents, the admitting physician's assessment, the records that had come with him from the Redstone 5A clinic that had referred him in. The referral notes from the VA were 3 lines long. That was wrong. A veteran with Logan's apparent complexity, referred for inpatient psychiatric care, should have come with pages of documentation. She cross-referenced the admission date with the VA system's patient transfer protocol. The records that had been sent were incomplete. She sat with this for a while. Then she went home, made dinner, and looked up the relevant federal regulations regarding military working dogs and their handlers. On her 4th day, Darlene called her into the nursing station at the start of her shift with an expression that had moved past skepticism into something flatter and more deliberate. There's been a decision made regarding room 718, Darlene said. Emily set her bag down. What kind of decision? Dr. Aldgate has determined that the animal presents an ongoing liability. Starting tomorrow morning, security will be entering room 718 to remove it. Remove it where? Animal control has been notified. Emily looked at her. Animal control? The dog will be taken to a county facility pending an evaluation of whether it's suitable for... That dog is a decorated military working dog, Emily said. It has a documented operational history with its handler. You can't separate a veteran with a service designation from his working dog without going through a federal review process. That's not hospital policy. That's federal law. Title 38. Darlene's jaw was tight. This has been decided by administration. Then administration needs to talk to a federal attorney before 9 a.m. tomorrow, because what Dr. Aldgate is planning is illegal. A silence. The kind that meant something had shifted. You're a nurse, Darlene said. You don't make legal determinations. I'm telling you what the law says. You can verify it yourself in about 4 minutes. Emily kept her voice even, because she had learned a long time ago that the moment your voice stopped being even, you lost the argument even if you were right. If that removal happens tomorrow and Logan Hayes has a crisis response to it and someone gets hurt, the hospital is liable. More than it already is. This is not your decision. No, Emily said. It's yours. And Dr. Aldgate's. I'm just making sure you both understand what you're deciding. Darlene went to Dr. Varga. Dr. Varga went to Aldgate. Aldgate came to the nursing station at 2 in the afternoon with the specific expression of a man who had arrived at a destination he found distasteful. He was 61, trim in the way that administrators often were, the kind of fitness that came from controlled circumstances, not from carrying things in difficult weather. He had a way of occupying space that was used to not being challenged. I understand you've been raising concerns about a patient in 718, he said. I raised a clinical concern about an outdated restraint order and a procedural concern about the animal removal plan, Emily said, both of which are documented in the chart. I also understand you've been suggesting the hospital could face legal exposure. I cited specific federal statutes. That's not a suggestion, it's information. Aldgate looked at her with the measuring quality of someone deciding which instrument to use. Where did you practice before coming here? General Medical Surgical, Northern Ohio Regional. And before that? She held his gaze. Military. Something moved across his face. Not respect, recalibration. Your concerns have been noted, he said. The decision regarding the animal stands. If you have a legal theory you'd like to pursue, you're welcome to pursue it on your own time. He paused. I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you're invested in here, and whether that investment is wise at this stage of your career. He left. Emily stood at the nursing station for a moment after he was gone. She thought about what he'd said, the way he'd said it. At this stage of your career, the implication was clear enough. She was new. She had no seniority, no institutional relationships, no documented history of being right about anything in this building. Aldgate had 20 years here and a board behind him and a joint commission review that he needed to go smoothly. She thought about Logan Hayes, who had spent 15 years doing things on behalf of this country that could not be named in any public document, and who was currently in a room on the 4th floor of this building with his dog and whatever was left of whatever he'd been carrying since he'd come home. She went back to work. Checked. At 9:30 that night, she was doing a final chart review before end of shift. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It said, "Do you know what they did to the veteran in 604 last spring? Ask Hauk about room 604. She was there. She stared at it for a moment. Then she finished her chart review, clocked out, and drove home, in the kind of deliberate silence that meant she was thinking hard about something she wasn't sure she was ready to know. The morning of day 5, the hallway outside room 718 had the specific quality of something about to go wrong. There were 2 security guards stationed near the door who hadn't been there the previous evening. Emily clocked them from the elevator and walked the long way around to the medication cart, buying herself 90 seconds to assess. Darlene was at the nursing station with a look that was professionally blank in a way that meant she knew something was happening and had decided she was not going to involve herself in it. Emily went to the cart, drew up Logan's morning medications, started her rounds. She went to 718 last. She knocked twice. Waited. No answer. She knocked again. Logan, it's Emily. From inside, Ruger gave one short, sharp bark. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She went in. Logan was standing, not pacing, standing in the center of the room with the flat, precise awareness of a man who had already assessed every option available to him. Ruger was at his left side, pressed against his leg, not sitting, standing with his weight forward. "They told you," Emily said. "They came in last night, after midnight, 2 of them." Logan's voice was controlled in a way that cost something. "Told me the dog was being picked up at 8. Animal control. Said it was hospital policy." He looked at her. "I asked to see the paperwork. They didn't have any." "There's no paperwork," Emily said, "because there's no legal basis. I've been trying to stop it." "I know." A pause. "I heard you in the hall yesterday, with Aldgate." She hadn't known he could hear that. "Okay. You're not going to be able to stop it," he said. Not bitterly, just factually, with the resignation of someone who had been failed by institutions enough times to recognize the pattern. People like Aldgate, they decide something. They have the resources to make it happen regardless of what's legal. "I know that's been your experience." "It's not experience, it's evidence." He looked at Ruger. "I've watched them do it to other guys. Nobody fights for us once we're in here. We're problems to be managed." "I am fighting for you," Emily said. "I want you to know that before whatever happens next." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was doing a complicated thing. "Why?" he said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. She didn't have a clean answer. The clean answer would have been because it's the right thing, which was true but also easy. The kind of thing you said when you didn't want to go deeper. The real answer was something about her second deployment, about a night in Kunar province when her sergeant had been the only one who'd stayed with her while she worked on a patient who didn't make it, and about how that kind of presence, being with someone in the worst of it, was the thing that determined whether a person survived the aftermath intact or didn't. She said, "Because I know what it costs to come back, and I know what it costs when the people who are supposed to take care of you don't." The hallway outside went quiet in a way that wasn't right. Then, boots. Multiple sets, and a voice she didn't recognize saying, "Room 718, stand clear." Ruger's hackles went up. The sound he made was not a bark. It was lower, more fundamental. Logan moved, not toward the door, toward the corner, the defensible position, which was trained response so deep it was probably reflex. "Don't let them in," he said. "Emily." The door opened. 2 security guards came in first, which was a mistake. They came in fast, which was a worse one. The second one had a catch pole, a metal rod with a loop on the end, the thing animal control used on dogs that hadn't been handled. Ruger saw it. Everything happened in about 4 seconds. The guard swung the pole. Ruger went sideways, not panicked, trained, and came back on the guard's dominant side, and the guard stumbled back into his partner, and Logan came off the wall with the specific efficiency of someone who had been in confined space altercations in conditions considerably more serious than this, and Emily stepped in front of all of it and said, "Stop," in the voice she had learned in a field hospital in Kunar province, the voice that came from the diaphragm and left no room for argument. Everything stopped. Ruger stood between Logan and the guards with his teeth showing and his eyes flat. Logan had one guard's arm and wasn't doing anything with it yet, holding, waiting. Emily was standing between all of them. The guard with the catch pole was breathing hard. The other one had his radio up. "You're going to put that pole down," Emily said. Not loudly. The way you talked when you didn't need volume because the words were doing the work. "Right now, on the floor, slowly." "Ma'am, you have an unlawful removal order for a federally classified military working dog from a veteran protected under federal medical statutes. If that pole touches this animal, this hospital is looking at a federal violation and every person in this room is looking at individual liability." She didn't take her eyes off the guard. "Put it down." A long second, the guard lowered the pole. Didn't put it down, but lowered it. "Both of you, step back into the hallway. I'm calling hospital legal right now." She already had her phone out. "This does not happen today." They stepped back. The door didn't close all the way. Logan let go of the guard's arm. In the hallway, someone was already on a radio. Emily could hear the words "situation in 718" and nurses refusing and escalate to Aldgate. She looked at Logan. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something past relief, something that had a harder edge to it. "They're going to come back with more people," he said quietly. "Yes." "And you're still going to be here?" "Yes." He sat down on the edge of the bed. Ruger came and pressed his flank against Logan's knee, and Logan's hand went to the dog's back without him seeming to think about it, the way people do with things they've been holding on to for a long time. From the hallway, Emily heard a new sound. Not the rubber soles of hospital staff, not the clatter of equipment carts, heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that did not belong anywhere near a civilian hospital corridor. She went to the door and looked out. At the far end of the hallway, past the nursing station where Darlene stood with her hand over her mouth, past the 2 security guards who had stopped moving entirely, past the overhead lights that made the linoleum floor look pale as bone. 3 black vehicles were visible through the window at the end of the hall. Military plates. And coming through the stairwell door in gray-green utilities with no hospital identification, but with the bearing of people who had never once in their lives needed to announce their authority. 4 soldiers. 1 officer. The officer was a woman in her 50s, silver oak leaf on her collar. Her eyes moved across the hallway with the efficient scan of someone doing rapid threat assessment, and then they landed on room 718, and then on Emily standing in the doorway. She walked forward. Everything in the hallway went still. The lieutenant colonel stopped 4 feet from Emily and looked at her the way experienced officers look at someone they're trying to place. Not dismissively, but with the focused attention of a person running a quick file search in real time. "You're the nurse," she said. Statement, not question. Emily Carter. Yes. Lieutenant Colonel Diane Marsh, U.S. Army Special Operations Command. She didn't offer her hand, which wasn't rudeness, it was efficiency. Her eyes moved past Emily to the room behind her, to Logan visible on the edge of the bed, to Ruger standing at his knee. Something shifted in her expression, small and controlled. "How is he?" "Medically stable, psychologically under significant stress compounded by this morning's removal attempt." "They tried to take the dog." "Yes." Marsh's jaw tightened by a fraction. She turned to the 2 security guards who had been standing in the hallway with the specific paralysis of people who had just realized they were in a situation much larger than the one they'd been briefed for. "You 2, she said, "step to the end of the hall. Don't make calls." They went. Behind Marsh, her soldiers had fanned into the hallway in a loose formation that was not aggressive, but made the space feel different, contained, purposeful. One of them, a staff sergeant with a clipboard and an expression of permanent mild displeasure, was already talking to someone on a cell phone in a voice too low to catch. Darlene Hauk was still at the nursing station. She looked, for the first time in Emily's experience of her, genuinely uncertain about what to do with her hands. Marsh turned back to Emily. "I need to speak with him. I need you to make that happen." "He doesn't," Emily started, then reconsidered. "Give me 2 minutes with him first." It wasn't a negotiation. She was already turning back to the room. Logan had heard enough of it. His posture when she came back in was different. Still coiled, but with something attentive in it. Ruger had settled slightly, one ear cocked toward the hallway. "Military," he said. "Lieutenant Colonel, Special Operations Command." Emily kept her voice low. "She knows who you are." He was quiet for a moment. Whatever was moving through him, he kept it internal. "She sent for, or she came herself?" "Came herself. 4 personnel with her." He absorbed this. His hand moved slowly along Ruger's spine, back and forth. "What does she want?" "She wants to talk to you. I think she's here to help." Emily looked at him steadily. "I can't promise that, but she asked about you first, before anything else." Logan looked at the door. A long, private calculation was happening behind his eyes. This was not a man who trusted easily or quickly. He had not gotten to 44 in one piece by doing that. But he was also, Emily had come to understand over 5 days, a man who could read a situation and make a decision and commit to it without flinching. "Okay," he said. "Let her in." Marsh came in alone, which said something. She stood just inside the door and looked at Logan with a directness that was not unkind. Two people who had operated in the same world, who recognized in each other the particular wear that world left behind. "Logan," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Don't know you." "No. But you know Colonel Rafferty." A beat. Something moved in Logan's face. "Rafferty's retired." "He made some calls." Marsh glanced at Ruger, who was watching her with ears forward. "He made them yesterday when we got a flag on your admission. Took us this long to get here." A pause that had some weight in it. "I'm sorry it took that long." Logan didn't say anything. He was doing the thing he did sometimes where he went very still, and Emily had learned that still didn't mean shut down. It meant processing hard. "I need to know your current status," Marsh said. "All of it, not what's in these charts." She said these charts with a specific flatness that communicated her assessment of them. "What's actually happening with you?" "You're going to fix it?" His voice was level, but there was a seam in it. "I'm going to make sure it's handled correctly. That's what I can tell you right now." She didn't oversell it. Emily noticed this and filed it away as a mark in Marsh's favor. "But I need to understand what we're working with." Logan looked at Emily. She gave him a small nod. "Your call." He looked back at Marsh and started talking. Emily stepped out into the hallway to give them space and found herself standing next to the staff sergeant with the clipboard, who had finished his phone call and was now documenting something with the focused industry of a man who had a lot to accomplish in a short window. "You flagged this?" he asked, without looking up. "Flagged what?" "The removal order. The federal violation." He glanced at her sideways. "Someone in this hospital submitted a legal inquiry to a VA watchdog organization 2 days ago. It got routed to our office yesterday morning." Emily said nothing. He looked at her for a moment. "Wasn't saying it like that's a problem." "I know." He went back to his clipboard. "She's going to want the complete nursing record on Hayes, everything from admission." "I can get that." "And anything you've documented about the removal order, the conversations with administration. Also documented." She paused. "There's a text message I received last night. An unknown number referenced another patient, room 604, from last spring." His pen stopped. "You have the message?" "On my phone." "Yes." He looked at her with a new quality of attention. "Don't delete it." "I wasn't planning to." Gitched. Aldgate arrived 22 minutes later. He came from the elevator with Marcus Webb, the hospital's legal counsel, half a step behind him, a compact man with the prematurely aged look of someone who had spent a career cleaning up other people's messes and was beginning to resent it. Aldgate had changed his assessment of the situation visibly between the nursing station and the hallway outside 718. He'd come up fast, he'd seen the military personnel, and by the time he was 15 feet from Marsh, he had recalibrated into something more careful. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said, extending his hand. "Warren Aldgate, director of Iron Ridge Medical Center. I wasn't informed we'd have a military presence." "You weren't," Marsh said. She didn't take his hand immediately. Let a half second go by first, not enough that he could object to it, just enough that he felt it. Then she shook it. "We're here regarding the care and status of one of your patients. A patient whose admission raises some serious questions about your facility's compliance with federal veteran protection statutes. We follow all applicable regulations. Your facility issued a removal order for a classified military working dog without going through the required federal review process." Marsh's tone was conversational, which made it worse. "You directed hospital security to execute that order this morning. One of your staff attempted to restrain the animal with a catch pole in the patient's room." She glanced at her sergeant, who produced a printed document and extended it toward Webb. "That's the relevant federal statute and your facility's specific violation. You can have your legal team verify it. I'd suggest doing that now." Webb took the paper with the expression of a man who already knew what it was going to say. Aldgate's face was doing the work of staying calm. "This is a single incident interpretation of a very complex. It's also not the only thing we're looking at," Marsh said. "But let's take this one step at a time." The way she said it made Aldgate go still. Emily watched this from the nursing station, where she had gone to pull Logan's complete records per the sergeant's request. Darlene was standing at the other end of the station, doing something on the computer that she was clearly not focused on. Her shoulders were drawn in. She'd been like that since Marsh arrived. Emily printed the last of the records, clipped them, and then, because she had been thinking about it since last night, and because the moment felt like the one where she either said something or didn't, she said quietly, "Darlene, room 604. Darlene's hand stopped on the keyboard. "I got a message last night. Someone who said I should ask you about it." A long pause. Darlene's reflection in the darkened computer screen had its eyes down. "I don't know who sent you that," Darlene said finally. "I'm not asking who sent it." Another pause. Longer. Emily let it sit. "His name was Arthur Pell," Darlene said very quietly. 71 years old, Korean War-era family. His son was a veteran, Marine, 2 tours. She stopped. "The son was a patient here last spring, room 604. He had a service animal too, a smaller dog. Emotional support designation." Her voice had gone flat in the way of someone reciting something to get through it. Aldgate had it removed. Day 6 of the admission. Staff was told it was a documentation issue. She paused again. "The son deteriorated significantly after that. He was discharged 2 weeks later. He didn't do well after discharge." Emily waited. "His father came back to the hospital in September. He wanted to speak to someone. He was very calm, very polite." Darlene finally looked up. "I walked him out. That's what I was told to do." Aldgate said the case was closed and any further contact with the family was a liability risk. She looked at her hands. "I walked that man out of this building." The hallway outside was still full of quiet, purposeful military movement. "That text message," Emily said carefully. "The person who sent it, do you have any idea who might have known about room 604? A lot of staff knew. Nobody wanted to say anything." A pause. "I should have said something." Emily didn't fill the silence with reassurance because that would have been the wrong response. Some things deserve to sit. "There's an investigator in this hallway right now," Emily said finally. "His name is Staff Sergeant. I didn't get his last name. He's collecting documentation." She met Darlene's eyes. "What happened to that Marine is going to come out regardless. The question is whether you're on the right side of it when it does." Darlene looked at her for a long time. Her expression was complicated. Guilt and defensiveness, and something underneath both of those that might have been relief. The kind you felt when someone finally named the thing you'd been carrying. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Marsh came out of room 718 40 minutes after she'd gone in. Logan had done most of the talking, Emily understood, though she hadn't heard any of it. Only the rhythm of voices through the closed door, Marsh's measured and brief, Logan's longer, rougher at the edges. He looked different when she came back in to check his afternoon vitals. Not better, exactly. There was still a tightness around his eyes and a specific quality of exhaustion that came from talking about things you'd been keeping sealed, but the room had lost some of its held breath quality. Ruger was lying down. That was new. "You doing okay?" she asked, fitting the blood pressure cuff. He shrugged, which from Logan was not dismissal. It was an honest answer about something he was still computing. "She said you might be subpoenaed," he said after a moment. "I know." "As a witness. To what happened here." "I know." He watched her work the cuff. "You're not worried about that?" "I'm worried about a lot of things," Emily said honestly. "That one's pretty low on the list." He almost smiled. Almost. It moved the corners of his mouth in a way that probably hadn't happened often lately. "What's high on the list?" She deflated the cuff, noted the reading, better than yesterday by 4 points, which meant something. "Whether that text I got about room 604 leads where I think it leads." Logan went quiet. "What happened in room 604? She told him. Briefly, without editorial, just what Darlene had told her. He listened with his eyes down, his hand resting on Ruger's back. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a while. "Marine," he said finally. "Yes. We don't do well without our dogs." He said it the way you said something that was factual and personal at the same time. It sounds simple. It's not simple. They're the only thing in a lot of situations that makes the noise quiet down. You take that away from a guy who's already... He stopped. That Marine had a family, a father. Yes. And they walked the father out. Yes. Logan was quiet again, then, "What do you need from me?" Emily looked up. "What do you mean?" "To build the case. Whatever's happening with Marcia's investigation, what does she need from me that I haven't already given her?" It struck her, the turn in it, the way he'd moved within 40 minutes from a man defending a corner to a man asking how to help. That was Logan Hayes, not the intake paperwork's version, this version. "I'll ask her," Emily said, "but I think your testimony about your own treatment here is going to be significant." He nodded, settled back against the headboard. "I've given testimony before, different circumstances." A pause. "I'll do it, Twot." Aldgate called an emergency administrative meeting at 2 p.m. that afternoon, which Emily learned about from the notice posted to the staff communication board and from the fact that Darlene disappeared into it for 90 minutes without telling anyone where she was going. Emily ran the wing almost alone for that 90 minutes. It was busier than usual. Marcia's presence had unsettled the patient population in a low-grade atmospheric way, the way you could feel a barometric change before the rain. She managed it. Changed a dressing on 712, talked a patient in 709 through a difficult call with his ex-wife, handled a medication confusion on 715 that turned out to be a charting error from the previous shift, and not, thankfully, an actual administration error. She was charting at the nursing station at 3:40 when Webb appeared. He came alone, which was notable. He was carrying a folder and had the look of a man making a decision he wasn't entirely sure about. "Ms. Carter," he said, "do you have a few minutes?" She looked at him. Marcus Webb had been, in her limited experience of him, primarily the administrative instrument of Warren Aldgate's decisions. He had not, to her knowledge, functioned as an independent actor. "Sure," she said. He sat down across from her at the station and placed the folder on the counter. "I've been legal counsel for this institution for 9 years," he said. "I need you to understand that my obligation is to the hospital, not to any individual administrator within it. That's an important distinction right now." Emily waited. "There was a meeting this morning before the military arrived, between Dr. Aldgate and the department heads." Webb looked at the folder without opening it. "A decision was made to accelerate the removal of the patient's dog, and also to begin a documentation process that would..." He paused, choosing words. "Position you as the source of the disruption, as an inexperienced nurse who had involved herself inappropriately in an administrative decision." She was very still. "That documentation was initiated before Lieutenant Colonel Marsh arrived," Webb said. "It exists in the system. I want you to be aware of it." "Are you telling me this as the hospital's legal counsel?" "I'm telling you this as someone who has been watching this institution for 9 years and has made some personal determinations about where the line is." He slid the folder across to her. "That's a copy of what was entered into your personnel file this morning. You'll want your own counsel to see it." Emily looked at the folder, didn't open it. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a moment. "Arthur Pell came to this hospital in September. He was a retired school teacher. He was very polite." Something moved across Webb's face. "I was told to have him escorted out. I drafted the letter to his family afterward explaining that the case was closed." He stood. "I didn't know the full context at the time. I've since assembled a more complete picture." He straightened his jacket. "You should know," he said, "that Aldgate is in a meeting right now with 2 members of the hospital board, attempting to characterize this morning's events as an overreach by military personnel and a breach of institutional authority." He looked at her directly. "He's going to try to suspend you before end of business today. He believes if you're off the floor, the investigation loses its primary witness." Emily absorbed this. The folder sat between them on the counter. "Thank you," she said. Webb nodded once. Then he left. She called the staff sergeant's cell number from the break room. He picked up on the second ring. "Kowalski." "It's Emily Carter. I have something you need to see." A pause. "Where are you?" "Break room, 4th floor." "Stay there." He arrived in 4 minutes, which meant he'd been somewhere close. She showed him the folder. He read the first 2 pages, stopped, and took photos of every page with his phone without looking up or saying anything until he was done. "This was entered into your personnel file today," he said, "before your unit arrived, according to the hospital's legal counsel." Kowalski looked up. "Webb told you this?" "Yes." "Is he going to cooperate with the investigation?" "I think so. I think he's been waiting for an occasion to." She thought about how he'd said assembled a more complete picture. 9 years, and something had finally crossed a line he'd been standing at for a while. Kowalski was already texting. "Colonel Marsh needs to know about this." He glanced at her. "You know Aldgate is planning to suspend you. Webb said before end of business. We can move to prevent that if we—" He stopped texting. "Actually, we probably can't prevent it. He has the administrative authority." "I know." He looked at her with something that was close to respect. "And you're still here." "I'm still here," she confirmed. "Same as I was at 8 this morning." His phone buzzed. He read the message and stood. "Colonel wants you. Now, ma'am." Marsh was using the Wing's family consultation room at the far end of the corridor. When Emily arrived, 2 of her soldiers were outside the door, not blocking it, but present in the way that communicated that whatever was happening inside was not to be interrupted casually. Inside, Marsh was at the table with a laptop and several printed documents and a second person Emily hadn't seen before. A civilian woman in her 40s, business clothes, with the specific alertness of a government investigator. "Emily," Marsh said, "this is Rachel Odom. She's a federal investigator with the VA Office of Inspector General. She was already working a case when we flagged this facility." Marsh paused. "Sit down." Emily sat. Odom had a tablet in front of her. "You received a text message last night referencing a patient from last spring." "Room 604, yes. We know who sent it." Odom's tone was measured. "A former employee of this facility. She resigned in October. She's been trying to report what happened to the patient in room 604 through official channels for 3 months. She ran into walls at every level." A pause. "She saw your name in the federal inquiry that was submitted to the watchdog organization. Decided to try directly." Emily thought about the text. "Ask Hauk about room 604. Someone had been watching, waiting for anyone who might actually listen." "The patient's name," Odom said, "was Sergeant Marcus Delray, Marine Corps. 2 deployments to Fallujah. He was admitted here in March for a psychiatric crisis related to PTSD and TBI. His emotional support dog was removed on day 6. She looked at her tablet. "He was discharged against medical advice in late April. He died in May." The room was very quiet. Emily had known it was something like this. She had been building toward this since the text, since Darlene's voice in the hallway, since the folder Webb had slid across the counter. Knowing it was coming didn't make the shape of it land any lighter. "How?" she said. Odom didn't answer that directly. "His family has been asking questions. His father, specifically. Arthur Pell, who had come back to this building in September with his hat in his hand and his grief arranged into politeness, and been walked out. Aldgate knew about Delray's deterioration after discharge," Marsh said. "The former employee who texted you, she was present at a meeting where Aldgate discussed containment strategies for the family's potential legal action." She looked at Emily. "He knew. He made a calculated decision that silence was cheaper than acknowledgement." Emily looked at her hands on the table. "We're building a federal case," Odom said. "The evidence we have currently covers illegal removal of a classified military working dog, violation of federal veteran protections, and retaliatory personnel actions against medical staff." She paused. "We believe the Delray case adds deliberate neglect and potential negligent death. But we need testimony from people who were inside this facility when decisions were made." "Darlene Hauk," Emily said. "She's agreed to speak with us at 5 o'clock. "Webb. We're speaking with him as well." Odom looked at her steadily. "And you? Your documentation, your observations, the personnel action taken against you today, all of it is material." A pause. "I need to ask you directly. Are you willing to serve as a witness in a federal investigation?" There was no version of her life in which the answer was different. "Yes," Emily said. The door opened. Kowalski leaned in. His expression had changed, sharper, with something urgent in it. "Ma'am." He was looking at Marsh. "Aldgate just submitted a suspension notice for Ms. Carter, effective immediately. He's also called building security to have her escorted off the property." Marsh looked at Emily. Emily looked at Marsh. "Tell me," Marsh said evenly. "Does that change your answer?" Emily thought about Logan in his room down the hall, about Ruger lying down for the first time in 8 days, about Arthur Pell being walked out with his polite grief and his unanswered questions. "No," she said. "It doesn't." Marsh turned to Kowalski. "Find out who's coming to escort her and intercept them. Nobody removes a federal witness from a federal investigative scene." Her voice had the quality of something that had already happened. "And someone go tell Dr. Aldgate we'd like to speak with him. Now. Not when he's ready. Now." Kowalski was already out the door. Emily sat at the table in the family consultation room with the federal investigator and the lieutenant colonel. And outside the window, the afternoon had gone gray and close, the way Ohio afternoons did in March, the light flattening out before the temperature dropped. And down the hall in room 718, a man and his dog were, for the first time in 8 days, no longer fighting alone. And in the director's office at the other end of the building, Warren Aldgate was about to find out that the walls he'd built were not as solid as he'd believed, and that the woman he'd tried to remove from this floor 3 hours ago had not in fact left. She had not left at all. Aldgate made them wait 9 minutes. It was a power move so transparent it was almost sad, the kind of thing that worked on hospital staff and department heads and medical vendors who needed something from him. The kind of thing that meant nothing to a lieutenant colonel who had waited out firefights in buildings with no electricity and no extraction timeline. Marsh used the 9 minutes to finish reviewing Odom's case documentation. Kowalski used them to intercept the 2 security guards who had arrived at the 4th-floor nursing station to escort Emily out, inform them with quiet specificity that they were standing in a federal investigative scene, and suggest they return to their posts. They did. When Aldgate finally appeared in the doorway of the consultation room, he had straightened his jacket and arranged his face into something that was trying to be composed and landing closer to brittle. He looked at the room. Marsh, Odom, Emily. The documentation spread across the table. His legal counsel, Webb, seated to the side with the posture of a man who has already switched sides but hasn't announced it yet. "Lieutenant Colonel," Aldgate said, "I want to be clear that this hospital has cooperated fully." "Sit down, Dr. Aldgate," Marsh said. He sat. Odom placed a printed document in front of him. "I'm Rachel Odom, VA Office of Inspector General. You're not under arrest at this time, but I want you to understand that what I'm about to show you is the current scope of our federal investigation into Iron Ridge Medical Center's treatment of veteran patients. You have the right to have legal counsel present." Aldgate glanced at Webb. Webb looked at the table. Something in Aldgate's face understood, in that moment, that Webb was no longer his. "The investigation currently encompasses," Odom continued, "violation of federal protections under Title 38 regarding military working dogs and their handlers, specifically the case of Master Sergeant Logan Hayes and his military working dog Ruger. Unlawful retaliatory personnel action against a medical staff member serving as a federal witness." She turned a page. "And the case of Sergeant Marcus Del Rey, admitted March through April of last year, whose emotional support animal was removed without lawful process, who deteriorated significantly following that removal, and who died 6 weeks after discharge." The room was very quiet. Aldgate's chest rose and fell once. Sergeant Del Rey's discharge was handled according to standard protocol. "Dr. Aldgate," Odom said, "I'd encourage you strongly not to speak without your own counsel present, not Mr. Webb, independent counsel." She looked at him with the patient, impersonal attention of someone who has done this many times. "The evidence we have includes internal meeting notes from March of last year in which you discussed, and I'm reading directly, containment strategies for the Del Rey family's potential legal exposure. That document was written the same week Sergeant Del Rey's dog was removed." She closed the folder. "I'd like to continue this conversation with your attorney present. We'll schedule that for tomorrow morning. Tonight, I'm asking you not to contact any current or former staff regarding this matter, not to access or alter any hospital records, and not to leave Redstone County." Aldgate stared at her. Are those instructions clear? Odom said. A long silence. Yes, he said. It came out smaller than he'd intended. He left the room without looking at Emily. She watched him go and felt not satisfaction exactly. Something more complicated. The particular flatness that came after a thing you'd been bracing for finally happened, and the bracing itself had cost something you wouldn't fully calculate until later. Marsh was gathering her documents. You need to go home tonight, she said to Emily without looking up. Get rest. You're going to be giving a formal recorded statement tomorrow. Logan, he's going to be fine tonight. I have 2 of my people staying on the floor. Marsh glanced at her. He knows. We spoke before I came here. A pause. He asked me to tell you something. Emily waited. He said, tell her to sleep. She's not going to be any use to anyone running on empty. Marsh's voice carried something that might have been dry humor in a different context. He also said you'd probably ignore that. Emily almost smiled. He's probably right. Go home, Marsh said. We resume at 8. She didn't sleep well. This was not surprising. She lay in the dark of her apartment with the text thread on her phone still open. The unknown number, the 3 words about room 604, the starting point of all of it, and thought about Marcus Del Rey, who she had never met, who had died in May with a name she hadn't known until this afternoon. She thought about the way veterans deteriorated when you removed the one thing that had been keeping the noise manageable. She had seen it in the field, not with dogs, but with the other things, the rituals, the partners, the specific architecture of coping that didn't make sense to anyone outside it. You couldn't explain to someone who hadn't been there why it mattered so much, why the removal of a thing that looked small from the outside could undo something critical inside. You couldn't explain it in language that fit a hospital policy document. She thought about Arthur Pell, who had come back in September with his polite grief, and who was somewhere right now in Redstone, not knowing that the building that had walked him out was finally, belatedly, being asked to answer for it. She needed to find him. That was a thought she hadn't had before tonight. She wasn't sure what the right channel for it was, or whether it was her place, or whether it would help or reopen something that had closed over in the way that wounds did, badly, incompletely, but closed. She put the phone down, stared at the ceiling, tried to sleep. The federal investigation made itself known to Iron Ridge Medical Center at 8:17 the following morning in the form of 3 investigators arriving simultaneously at the Medical Records Department, the administrative offices, and the IT server room with federal preservation orders. Emily arrived at 8, as instructed, and gave her recorded statement to Odom in an office the hospital had been directed to make available, a directive they had complied with in the stiff, airless way of an institution that understood it no longer had the leverage to do otherwise. The statement took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Emily was precise and chronological, referring to her nursing documentation when she could, and flagging clearly where she was giving observation versus documented record. Odom asked good questions, not leading, not confirmatory, the kind that were designed to surface information the investigator didn't already have. At one point, Odom asked, when Dr. Aldgate spoke to you directly in the hallway, what was your interpretation of his intent? Emily considered this carefully. He told me to think about whether my investment was wise at this stage of my career. My interpretation was that he was communicating that my position here was contingent on compliance with the removal order. Did you interpret that as a threat? I interpreted it as a conditional warning. Whether it constitutes a formal threat is a legal determination I'm not qualified to make. Odom wrote something down. But you understood it as pressure to stop. Yes. And you didn't stop. No. Odom looked up from her notes for the first time in several minutes. It wasn't admiration on her face. She was too professional for that. But it was something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. What made you certain enough to keep going? Emily thought about how to answer this honestly without making it sound cleaner than it was. The truth was that she hadn't been certain. Certainty was for people who hadn't seen what she'd seen in the field, where right decisions went wrong and wrong situations resolved for reasons that had nothing to do with who deserved what. She had not been certain about any of this. I wasn't certain, she said. I was clear. Those are different things. Bitte. Darlene's statement took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Emily knew this because she was in the fourth floor wing when Darlene returned, and the way Darlene moved when she came back was different. The held-in quality was gone, replaced by something rawer and lighter at the same time. The way people moved when they'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down on a table in front of the people who needed to see it. Darlene stopped at the nursing station, looked at Emily. "I told them everything," she said. Her voice was steady but thin. "The Delray case. The meeting last spring where Aldgate told us the dog was a liability. The instructions we were given about not documenting our concerns." A pause. "I told them I walked Arthur Pell out. I told them I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway." Emily looked at her. "That was the right thing to do." "It's 9 months too late." "Yes. No point in arguing otherwise." "But it's now." Darlene nodded once. Then she went back to work, because the wing still had patients, and the patients still needed care, and whatever was happening in the administrative end of this building, that part didn't stop. The escalation came at 11:40, and it came from a direction Emily hadn't anticipated. She was checking on Logan when Kowalski appeared in the doorway of 718 with a look she hadn't seen on him before. Controlled urgency, the kind that meant something had moved faster than expected. "We've got a problem," he said. "Former patient. Name of Garrett Sims, admitted here last fall, discharged in December. He's in the lobby." Emily glanced at Logan. He was watching Kowalski with the alert stillness of someone who had already decided he was going to hear this regardless. "What kind of problem?" she said. "He drove 4 hours when he saw news vehicles outside. There are 2 local news crews in the parking lot. Someone in this building tipped them this morning. Sims says he was a patient here, Army, and that his service dog was removed during his admission." Kowalski's jaw was tight. "He's not calm. He's been in the lobby for 20 minutes, and hospital security doesn't know what to do with him, and our people are tied up with the record seizure." Logan sat up straighter. "What branch?" Kowalski looked at him. "Army. 82nd Airborne, 3 tours." Logan was already moving his legs toward the side of the bed. "Logan," Emily said, "I can talk to him." "You're a patient. I'm also the only person in this building who might be able to get through to him in the next 30 seconds if he's where I think he is." He looked at her. "You know I'm right." She did know that. It was the part she didn't want to say out loud because it meant letting a patient who was medically compromised walk out of his room into an unstable lobby situation, which violated approximately 7 care protocols. She also knew that the right move and the protocol-compliant move were not always the same move. "Marsh needs to know," she said. "Call her on the way," Logan said. He was already standing. Ruger was up beside him, reading him. Mbertsam. Garrett Sims was 37 years old, and he was standing in the center of the hospital lobby with the specific quality of a man who had arrived somewhere after a long time, deciding whether to come, and was now not entirely sure what to do with himself. He was tall, lean in the way of people who didn't eat enough, wearing a jacket with a unit patch on the shoulder. His hands were open at his sides, which was a good sign. His eyes were moving too fast, which wasn't. 2 of the hospital's security staff were maintaining a careful distance. An administrator Emily didn't recognize was speaking into a phone near the front desk. Logan walked into the lobby with Ruger at his left side and stopped 6 feet from Sims. Sims looked at him. Something passed between them. Not words, not gesture. The specific recognition of 2 people who had occupied the same territory in a way that left a mark that never fully faded. 82nd, Logan said. Sims's eyes stabilized slightly. "Yeah. I'm Hayes, 75th. A pause. "They took your dog." It wasn't a question. Sims's face did something complicated. "December, 3rd day. Said it wasn't a certified service animal, which was... They had all the paperwork. I had all the..." He stopped, pressed his mouth closed. "I know," Logan said. "I know what they said." "I didn't get better after that." Sims said it flatly, as a medical fact. "I was supposed to be here 3 weeks. I got worse. They discharged me at 6 weeks, and I've been..." He looked around the lobby. "I saw the news trucks. I drove here because I didn't know what else to do. I don't know if that was... I don't know." "It was right," Logan said. You coming here was right. Emily stood at the edge of this, next to Kowalski, and watched Logan Hayes, a man who had been strapped into a restraint order 6 days ago, whose own dog had nearly been removed at the end of a catch pole, who was still technically a psychiatric inpatient, talk another soldier down from the edge of something with a steadiness and precision that no training manual had ever been able to fully capture. Ruger sat. It was the same thing he'd done in room 718, the same settling, the same signal, a trained animal telling both men that the threat level had dropped below the threshold. Sims looked at Ruger for a moment. Then he crouched down, slowly, and put his hand out. Not the reaching grab of someone unfamiliar with working dogs, but the flat, offered palm. The patient presentation. Ruger leaned forward and pressed his nose into Sims's palm. Sims's shoulders came down about 2 inches. There are federal investigators here, Logan said. Upstairs. They're building a case and they need to hear from people who were patients. What happened to you is part of this. Sims looked up. You sure? I'm sure. Odom took Garrett Sims's statement that afternoon. It lasted 90 minutes, and what came out of it, Emily learned from Kowalski at the end of the day, was a pattern of removal orders executed on veteran patient service and emotional support animals across a 14-month period. 5 confirmed cases. Sims was the 4th. The 5th was a patient who had been discharged the week before Emily arrived, whose file showed a removal order that had been documented as the patient's voluntary request. A falsification, Sims confirmed, because he'd been on the ward at the same time and the patient had not been voluntary about anything. 5 veterans, 5 removals, 1 death. And in every case, the documentation had been managed, worded to close off inquiry, signed by attending physicians who had, in several instances, been pressured into language they hadn't originated. Emily learned this in pieces, over the course of an afternoon that moved with the particular terrible momentum of a thing gathering its full weight. She learned it between patient checks and medication rounds, because the wing still had patients who needed care, and she was still their nurse, and that part did not stop. At 4:15, Marsh found her in the hallway. The board has been contacted, Marsh said. They're convening an emergency session tonight. 2 members have already indicated they were unaware of the scope of what Aldgate had been managing. She paused. 2 others, we believe, knew more than they're currently representing. What happens to the hospital? That's a longer process. Federal compliance review, structural changes to the psychiatric department at minimum, but that's months out. Marsh looked at her steadily. What happens in the next 72 hours is Aldgate. The OIG is preparing to recommend charges. Odom is moving faster than I've seen her move in 4 years of working alongside her office. Because of Delray. Because of all of them. But yes, Delray is the weight that tips it. Emily was quiet for a moment. Arthur Pell, she said, Delray's father. Does he know what's happening? Marsh's expression shifted slightly. Odom's office has been in contact. He's been notified that the investigation is active. She paused. He asked one question, apparently. Just one. What was it? He asked if his son would be remembered correctly. Emily stood with this. What did they tell him? That it was the goal, Marsh said. That we couldn't promise the outcome, but that was the goal. At 5:47, Emily was finishing her end-of-shift documentation at the nursing station when her personal cell phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from the first one. She opened the message. They're going to make a deal. Aldgate. Board is pushing for a quiet resignation and a non-disclosure, no charges. His lawyer called the board chair an hour ago. She stared at it. Then she walked to the consultation room where Odom was still working and knocked. Odom looked up. Emily showed her the phone. Odom read it once, then again. Something in her face went very flat and very focused. Who sent this? Odom said. I don't know. Second unknown number. Odom stood. She picked up her own phone and made a call, turning slightly away. Emily could hear the words accelerate the timeline and tonight if possible, and yes, I'm sure. She hung up and looked at Emily. We've been monitoring board communications since this morning, Odom said. If what this says is accurate, she stopped, recalibrated. There is a process for preventing a private settlement from interfering with a federal criminal investigation. I'm initiating it now. Her voice was controlled and absolute. But if someone on that board makes a call to Aldgate's attorney in the next 2 hours with an offer before we can move. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emily understood exactly what was at stake. 5 veterans, one of them dead, and the man responsible doing the calculation that had always worked before. That silence was cheaper than accountability, that institutions protected their own, that the people who had been harmed were already compromised enough that no one would push hard enough to matter. Odom was already moving toward the door. Emily's phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. 3 words. Board votes in 1 hour. Odom moved fast. Emily had seen people move with urgency before. In field hospitals, in emergency departments, in the particular compressed chaos of situations where time was the variable that determined outcomes. Odom moved differently. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had run out of patience for obstacles and was now in the business of removing them, one call at a time, in a voice that stayed level because levelness was more effective than volume. She was on her phone before she cleared the consultation room door. I need Judge Harlan's clerk, tonight. Tell him it's Odom, O-I-G, and we have a time-sensitive interference situation. She disappeared into the hallway. Emily stood in the consultation room with her phone in her hand and the 2 unknown number texts on the screen. Kowalski appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. You saw the messages. Yes. We've been monitoring board communications since this morning, but the call we needed to intercept happened on a personal cell. One of the board members, we believe it's the chair, a man named Rutherford Gaines, made a call to Aldgate's personal attorney at 5:22. He was already moving. Come with me. She followed him down the hallway, past the nursing station where the evening shift had just come on and was trying to understand why there were federal personnel on the floor, past room 718 where Logan's light was still on, to the far stairwell where Marsh was standing with a second phone pressed to her ear and an expression that had gone past controlled into something simpler and colder. Marsh hung up as they arrived. She looked at Kowalski first, then at Emily. The board chair made a settlement offer to Aldgate's attorney 40 minutes ago, Marsh said. Resignation effective immediately, non-disclosure agreement, and a severance package. No cooperation with the federal investigation, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. She said it like she was reading items off a list she was going to systematically destroy. Aldgate's attorney has not yet responded. They have a window. Can Odom stop it? Emily said. She's working on a federal court order to freeze any private settlement agreement that would interfere with a criminal investigation. Whether she gets it in the next... Marsh checked her watch. 52 minutes depends on Judge Harlan's availability and disposition. A pause. Harlan is not known for moving quickly. What happens if the settlement goes through before the order? Marsh was quiet for a moment. The criminal investigation continues regardless. A private NDA doesn't bind federal prosecutors, but it complicates the evidentiary picture, and it gives Aldgate's team the argument that the hospital itself has already resolved the matter. It also means he walks away with money. Her jaw set slightly. And it means Arthur Pell never sees the inside of a courtroom. Emily thought about the 5 veterans, about Garrett Sims' palm, flat and patient, offered to a dog he'd never met, about Marcus Delray, who had deteriorated on the 6th day and never fully recovered. Who's sending me these messages? She said. It was not quite a question. Kowalski and Marsh exchanged a look that lasted about a half second. We have a theory, Kowalski said carefully. Who? Another half second. Webb, Marsh said. Emily thought about this. Webb, who had spent 9 years watching, who had drafted the letter to the Delray family explaining that the case was closed, who had said, I've assembled a more complete picture in the particular tone of a man who had been building towards something for a long time and was finally ready to use it. He has access to the board's communications, she said. He's attended board meetings for 9 years, Marsh said. He knows who calls whom and from where. Then why is he texting me instead of calling you? Because he's still employed by this hospital, Marsh said. Because if he contacts us directly, he's potentially exposing himself to accusations of unauthorized disclosure of privileged communications. But if he contacts a private individual, she let it finish itself. A private individual who then brought the information to investigators without specifying the source. Clean hands, almost. He's threading a needle, Emily said. He's been threading needles for 9 years, Marsh said. He's good at it. The next 40 minutes were the longest Emily had spent in a building that wasn't actively on fire. She went back to the floor because there were patients, and the patients needed care, and standing in a stairwell vibrating with anxiety was not going to help anyone. She checked on Logan at 6:10. He was awake, sitting in his rest position, Ruger beside him. "You look like someone waiting for an explosion," he said. "Board is trying to settle. Get Aldgate out quietly." Logan's expression didn't change much. "Of course they are." He said it without surprise, with the specific flatness of someone who had expected this particular move and was not satisfied to have been right. "What happens if they do?" "Odom is trying to get a court order. 38 minutes. He looked at the window. Outside, the parking lot was still visible in the last of the evening light, and the 2 news vans were still there, cameras not rolling but positioned, their crews waiting with the professional patience of people who had learned that the story that made you wait was usually worth waiting for. "Those cameras out there," he said. "I know." "If Aldgate walks out of this building tonight with a check, that's the story. Quiet resignation, policy review, moving forward." He looked back at her. "That's been the story every time." "Not this time." "Because of Odom's order?" "Because of that," she said, "and because of Garrett Sims and Darlene and Webb and you." She met his eyes. "There are too many people in this building who've already talked. A settlement doesn't unsay any of it." He held her gaze. "But it slows it down." "Yes," she admitted. "It slows it down." He nodded, processing. Ruger shifted against his knee. "What do you need me to do?" Logan said. "Right now, stay here. Let me manage the next half hour." "After that?" She almost said rest, which was the right medical answer and the wrong personal one. "After that," she said, "I'll come back and tell you what happened." At 6:49, Odom appeared at the end of the 4th-floor hallway. Her expression told Emily the answer before she reached her. "Harlan signed it," Odom said. There was nothing triumphant in her voice, just the flat satisfaction of a mechanism working as it should. Federal order freezing any private settlement agreement between Warren Aldgate, Iron Ridge Medical Center, its board, or their legal representatives, pending the outcome of the federal criminal investigation. She had her phone out, showing Emily the document. It was served to the board chair's attorney at 6:43, 6 minutes ago. Emily let out a breath she had been holding, approximately since 5:47. "And Aldgate?" she said. His attorney received a copy simultaneously. "The offer from the board is now legally frozen. He can't accept it even if he wants to." Odom paused. "His attorney called me 30 seconds after service. He's angry." "That's fine." She pocketed her phone. "What's not fine is that Aldgate is still in this building. He's been in his office since our meeting this afternoon, and I'd like that to change." "You're moving on him tonight?" "We're asking him to come in voluntarily tomorrow morning for formal questioning. If he declines, we move to compel." She looked at Emily with the particular steadiness she'd had since this morning. Not warm exactly, but direct in a way that Emily had come to find solid. "You did well today. I want you to know that the documentation you produced, the nursing records, the personnel file, the timeline, it's the backbone of this case." Emily nodded. She didn't know what to do with gratitude in this context, so she filed it and kept moving. "The board," she said. "Rutherford Gaines. What happens to him?" "That depends on what we find in the records we seized today. If we can establish that he had material knowledge of the Delray case and actively worked to suppress the family's legal recourse," Odom paused. "It's not the same charge as Aldgate, but it's not nothing." She drove home at 8, which was later than Marsh had wanted, and earlier than she would have chosen, because the equilibrium she'd been maintaining all day was starting to develop small fractures she didn't want anyone to see. She sat in her car in the parking lot of her building for about 4 minutes before going in. The thing about holding yourself steady through a situation like today was that the steadiness was real while it was happening. She wasn't performing it. She wasn't white-knuckling through it. She'd actually felt okay, functional, clear. But when the external pressure dropped, the internal pressure asserted itself, And right now, she was sitting in a dark parking lot in Redstone, Ohio, thinking about Marcus Del Rey, who had been 29 years old and who had come home from Fallujah carrying something he'd needed help managing, and who had been in a building full of people whose job was to help him and had not been helped. She thought about the nurse who must have been assigned to room 604. Whether that nurse had seen what Emily had seen in Logan and had tried to say something and been shut down, or whether they hadn't looked closely enough, or whether the machinery of that ward had been so thoroughly oriented toward management over treatment that the looking wasn't happening at all. She thought about what it would have taken for someone to intervene then, in March of last year, the way Emily had tried to intervene now. Whether there had been a moment where one person could have changed the outcome. She sat with the fact that she didn't know, that she might never know, that some things didn't have a version where you traced backward and found the single point of failure that, if corrected, would have saved everything. She went inside and ate something she didn't taste and slept harder than she expected to. The next morning broke clear and cold, which felt incongruent with everything, the way weather often did. Emily arrived at 8. The morning shift was already managing the residual disruption of the previous day. Federal investigators were still present on the records floor. The administrative wing was running on reduced staff because 3 people had called in, and the parking lot had gained a 3rd news van overnight. She went directly to Logan. He was awake. He'd slept, she could tell. Not well, but enough. His color was better than it had been in days. Ruger lifted his head when she came in, tail doing a slow half-rotation. "Court order," she said. "Kowalski told me this morning. Settlement's frozen." He looked at her. "You went home." "Marsh told me to." "Good." He paused. "How are you?" It was such a simple question, direct and without maneuver, the way he said most things. She realized she'd been getting asked all morning by people in a professional context. How are you holding up? Are you okay? Is there anything you need? And she'd been giving the professional answer, which was competent and brief and essentially deflective. "I'm tired," she said, "and I keep thinking about Del Rey." Logan was quiet. "I didn't know him," she said. "I never met him. But he was here, in this building, and—" She stopped. "I think I'm angry. I've been keeping it managed, but underneath it I'm pretty angry." "Yeah," Logan said, "just that." "Does it help? Knowing that it's being investigated, that Aldgate is—" "It helps in the way that things help when the help is too late for the part that mattered most." He said it without self-pity, just precision. "But it's better than the alternative." "The alternative is, it never comes out, and the next guy who comes through that door gets the same thing." He looked at Ruger. "It has to be better than that." She checked his vitals. Better still. His blood pressure had dropped to a range that was, if not ideal, significantly improved from admission. His sleep data from the monitoring equipment showed REM cycles for the first time in his chart. "Marsh wants to transfer you," Emily said, "to Alton Military Medical. It's a 2-hour drive. They have a trauma program specifically for operators and their working animals." He considered this. "When?" "Day after tomorrow, if you're medically stable. She's been coordinating with their team." "Am I medically stable?" "Getting there." He looked at her. Something in his face was doing the calculation she'd seen him do before, weighing, assessing, committing. "Will you be there? When I go?" "I can be." "I'd like that," he said. Simply, like it was a fact he was stating rather than a request he was making. At 9:50, Aldgate arrived. He had not come voluntarily for formal questioning, as Odom had requested. He had come, flanked by 2 attorneys, neither of whom was Webb, to clean out his office, which was, legally, within his rights since he had submitted a resignation letter to the board at 7:40 that morning. The resignation was real this time. Not the settlement package version that the court order had frozen, but a unilateral departure without terms, which his attorneys had apparently advised as the cleanest move available. Odom had anticipated this. Emily learned later that she had sent an investigator to the administrative wing at 9 to ensure that Aldgate's office had already been subject to the preservation order, meaning he could not remove, take, or destroy any document, digital file, or physical record from the space. What he could take was personal property, framed photographs, a jacket on a hook, a coffee maker that had been there since he arrived. His attorneys, to their credit, had presumably already told him this. He came through the fourth-floor corridor at 10:12, which Emily suspected was not an accident. She was at the nursing station. He had to pass it to get to the administrative elevator at the far end. He walked with his attorneys on either side and a box of personal items under his arm. Photographs, a plaque, a small plant that looked like it hadn't been watered in some time. His jacket was straight. His face was controlled. He did not look at her. She watched him pass. 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet. Then, at 14 feet, he stopped. His attorneys kept walking for one more step before they registered it and stopped too. He turned and looked at her. Whatever she'd expected, anger, contempt, the practiced administrative blankness he'd had in every previous interaction. What she saw instead was something she hadn't anticipated. He looked tired. Not the tiredness of a single bad day, but the accumulated tiredness of someone who had been managing something heavy for a long time and had finally been relieved of it in the worst possible way. She didn't say anything. There was nothing she wanted to say. He held her gaze for about 3 seconds. Then he turned and kept walking. He got into the elevator. The doors closed. Emily turned back to her chart. Darlene was at the other end of the station watching the closed elevator doors. After a moment, she said quietly, "He built this department. 12 years ago, it was a storage wing." Her voice was complicated. I used to think he was a good administrator." "Maybe he was," Emily said, "for a while." Then he started making calculations. "They usually do." Darlene was quiet. Then she went back to work. The board met an emergency session at 2 p.m. Emily was not in the meeting. She learned what happened in it in pieces, from Kowalski and then from a brief summary Odom provided at 4:30. Rutherford Gaines, the board chair, had spent the first 40 minutes of the meeting insisting that he had acted within his authority in attempting to broker a settlement, that his intent had been to protect the hospital and its staff, and that the federal investigation was an overreach into institutional governance. The 2 board members who had initially indicated they were unaware of Aldgate's conduct had, by the second hour, produced emails. Emails that Gaines had sent them in April of the previous year, shortly after Marcus Delray's discharge, outlining the potential legal exposure from the Delray case and explicitly directing them not to request a formal incident review. They had complied at the time. They had kept the emails. People kept things. Emily had learned this in the field too. People kept things because some part of them knew, even in the moment of compliance, that they might need the evidence of what they'd been asked to do. Insurance, or conscience, or both. By hour 3, Gaines had stopped talking. The board voted to fully cooperate with the federal investigation. They voted to place the hospital under independent administrative oversight pending a complete compliance review. They voted unanimously to rescind Emily's suspension and restore her to full standing with a formal acknowledgement that the suspension had been an act of administrative retaliation without clinical basis. Odom sent her a text with the board's resolution attached. Emily was in room 718 when she read it. She sat in the chair beside Logan's bed, phone in her hand, and read the resolution twice. "Good news or complicated news?" Logan said. "Suspension rescinded." She put the phone down. They voted to cooperate with the investigation. And Gaines? Still in the building, Odom is deciding whether the emails constitute criminal conspiracy to obstruct. Logan nodded slowly. "What about you? What do you want to do when this is over?" She looked at him. It was a genuinely open question, not rhetorical, not polite. He was asking what she actually wanted. "Keep nursing," she said. "That part I know." A pause. "But I've been thinking about what Odom said, about the pattern here. Not just Aldgate, not just this hospital. 5 veterans, and this is one facility in one mid-sized city. There are hundreds of facilities." Logan was watching her. "Someone needs to build something," she said, "a real process, for veterans in civilian medical settings, something with teeth." She heard how it sounded, large, imprecise, the kind of statement that was easier to make than to execute, and added, "I have no idea how to do that." "Nobody who built something useful knew how at the beginning," Logan said. She looked at him. There was something in his face she hadn't seen in the 6 days she'd been his nurse. Not exactly peace, but the early outline of something that peace might eventually resemble. "Ruger," she said, "at Alton. Do they have experience with handlers and working dogs together in the same program?" "That's the only program Marsh would send me to," he said. She checked. Ruger looked up at the sound of his name and then looked at Logan with the specific attentiveness of an animal waiting to assess whether action was required. "No," Logan told him. "We're good." The dog put his head back down. The escalation she hadn't seen coming arrived at 6:15. It came in the form of Kowalski knocking on the door of room 718 with his phone in his hand and an expression that had cycled back to the controlled urgency of the previous evening, which Emily had come to recognize as his tell for situations that had moved outside the expected boundary. "There's been a development," he said. He was looking at Emily, not at Logan, which meant it was directly relevant to her. "We've been reviewing the records seized from the administrative office, financial records specifically." He paused. "There are payment records, consultancy fees paid quarterly to an LLC registered in Delaware. The LLC has been receiving payments from the hospital for 3 years. Emily waited. "We traced the LLC," he said. "It's held by a nominee director, a lawyer in Columbus who holds a lot of shell companies. But the beneficial owner, the person actually receiving the money," he stopped. "Who?" Emily said. "A former employee," Kowalski said. "Someone who left the hospital 18 months ago. Someone who had access to patient records, case files, and the internal decision-making process around patient removals." The air in the room had changed. "She left voluntarily," he continued. "Publicly, she cited personal reasons. Internally, according to Darlene Hauk's statement, she had a significant conflict with Aldgate over patient care protocols." He looked at Emily directly. "Her name is Sandra Keyes. She was a psychiatric case manager. She handled intake documentation for, among others, Marcus Delray and Garrett Sims." Emily was still. "She's also," Kowalski said, "the person who texted you from the first unknown number, the one that told you to ask about room 604, the person who had sent Emily toward this, who had been watching from outside the building, feeding information through a channel that couldn't be traced to her. A concerned former employee, a whistleblower, a source." "What are the payments for?" Emily said. Kowalski's expression was measured. "Officially, case management consulting. But the payment structure, quarterly, fixed amounts, not tied to any documented deliverable, doesn't fit a consulting arrangement. And they started 3 months after she left the hospital." "What does Odom think they are?" "Odom thinks they're silence payments," Kowalski said. "She thinks Aldgate was paying Keyes to stay quiet about what she knew regarding the Delray case specifically. And she thinks Keyes may have been keeping documentation, the kind you hold when you're being paid to be silent so that if the payments stop, you have something to trade." Emily processed this. Sandra Keyes, who had watched from outside for 18 months, who had sent one text to a nurse she'd never met, at a moment when the situation had finally created an opening, who had been both a victim of the system, pushed out, paid off, and possibly a person who had held something she could have used earlier and chose not to. "Is she talking to Odom?" Emily said. "She agreed to come in tomorrow morning," Kowalski said. "Her attorney has been in contact for the last hour." He paused. "But there's one more thing." He turned his phone toward Emily. It was an image of a document, a case file. She could see the header, Iron Ridge Medical Center Psychiatric and Trauma Recovery, and a patient name she hadn't seen before. The date was from 13 months ago. "There was a 6th veteran," Kowalski said. "We found the file in Keyes' personnel archive, which she retained when she left. She took a copy of it. Aldgate's team apparently didn't realize she had it." He watched Emily's face. "This patient was never publicly documented as having had a service animal removed. The record shows he voluntarily surrendered the animal due to non-compliance." Emily looked at the file, looked at the name. "He's still alive," Kowalski said. "He's currently a patient at a different facility in the state, and his testimony, if it matches what's in this file..." He stopped. "It changes the charge," Emily said. "It changes the charge," Kowalski confirmed. "From pattern of negligence to deliberate systematic removal of veteran support animals as a policy decision, which means intent, which means criminal conspiracy, Emily said. Logan, who had been listening from the bed without speaking, said quietly, Aldgate knew it was wrong from the beginning. That's what this file suggests, Kowalski said. That the removals weren't isolated administrative misjudgments, that there was a deliberate decision made at the director level to systematically eliminate the service and emotional support animals of veteran patients. He looked at Emily. Odom wants to move on him tonight, not tomorrow morning, tonight. Emily stood. What do you need from me? She said. Your testimony about Aldgate's direct communication to you, specifically the conversation in the hallway, what he said about your career. She wants a supplemental statement, specifically about intent, about whether his communication to you was consistent with a pattern of deliberate suppression rather than individual administrative decisions. Emily nodded. She looked at Logan, who was watching her with an expression she'd learned to read across the 6 days they'd spent in this particular crisis together, steady, clear, already committed to the direction she was going. Go, he said. She went. She was at the end of the hallway, hand on the stairwell door, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not the first one, not the second one. A third. She looked at the message. He's not in the building. He left through the loading dock at 5:40. His attorney drove him. They didn't go home. Emily stared at the screen. Kowalski's voice carried down the hallway. Carter? She turned. Aldgate left the building at 5:40, she said. Through the loading dock. Kowalski went very still. Then he had his radio up and was talking fast, and down the hall she could see Marsh emerging from the consultation room with her phone already at her ear, and the third unknown number sat on Emily's screen with its 12 words, and what they meant was that the man at the center of all of this was somewhere in Redstone, Ohio, with a head start of 35 minutes and an attorney who had apparently decided that the most useful service he could provide was not legal counsel, but a car. Marsh was already on with the U.S. Marshals Service when Emily reached the consultation room. She wasn't shouting. That was the thing about Marsh. The more urgent the situation, the quieter she got, the way pressure systems worked in reverse. Her voice through the phone was low and precise. Aldgate's description, the attorney's vehicle, the loading dock timestamp, the likely direction given the location of the attorney's registered office in the county, which Kowalski had pulled up on his tablet in under 90 seconds. Emily stood at the edge of the room and let them work. There was nothing she could add to the logistics, and she was experienced enough to know that being in the way of people who were executing something was worse than being out of it. What she could do was think about the third text. 3 different unknown numbers over 3 days, all accurate, all timed precisely enough to matter. The first had been Keys, Kowalski had confirmed that. The second was almost certainly Webb. The third, she didn't know. Someone else in the building, or someone watching it, who had seen Aldgate leave through the loading dock and had known to tell her specifically. She typed back, "Who are you?" The message delivered. No response. She put the phone in her pocket. Odom came in at a near run, which was the fastest Emily had ever seen her move. Marshals are pulling his plate. His attorney is registered to an office in Kellerton, which is 40 minutes north. We've flagged the route. She looked at Marsh. He's not under arrest yet. He resigned. He's technically free to go anywhere in the state. He left through a loading dock, Marsh said, 40 minutes after his board meeting ended and 25 minutes before you planned to bring him in for formal questioning. That's not coincidence. I know that. You know that. A federal judge is going to need it documented. Odom pulled out her tablet. I'm filing for an emergency material witness warrant. If we establish that he has knowledge critical to the federal investigation and that he may be attempting to leave the jurisdiction. How long? An hour. Maybe less if Harlan is still in his chambers. She was already typing. Marsh looked at Kowalski. Get me eyes on every route north of the city. I want to know if his attorney's car passes a single traffic camera between here and Kellerton. Kowalski was already gone. Emily said, What do you need from me right now? Odom didn't look up from her tablet. Pray that man's attorney is as bad at driving fast as he is at legal ethics. A pause. And give me that supplemental statement. Now, while I'm filing, talk. I'll type. Emily sat down. She talked. She was precise and sequential, the way she'd been trained to be in field documentation when accuracy mattered more than narrative flow. She described Aldgate's conversation in the hallway, the specific phrasing he'd used, the implied conditionality. She described Webb's visit to the nursing station and what he'd said about the documentation placed in her personnel file. She described the removal attempt in room 718, the catch pole, the sequence of events, her response. Odom typed and asked one question every few minutes, not to redirect but to sharpen. What exact words did he use? What time was this? Who was present? Clinical, fast, leaving no interpretive gaps that a defense attorney could later drive through. 22 minutes. Then Odom's phone rang. She picked it up, listened for 11 seconds, and said, "Don't approach. Keep visual. Marshals are 7 minutes out." She hung up and looked at Marsh. Traffic camera caught the attorney's vehicle on Route 9 North 40 minutes ago. They've located it. Roadside stop at a gas station in Milford. Marsh stood up from the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Warren Aldgate was taken into federal custody at 8:14 p.m. at a gas station off Route 9 in Milford, Ohio, 46 miles north of Redstone. He was not, it turned out, attempting to leave the state. His attorney later claimed they had simply been driving to the attorney's office to discuss strategy, which may even have been partially true. But strategy that requires a loading dock exit and a 46-mile drive is a specific kind of strategy, and the U.S. Marshals who pulled the vehicle over did not appear moved by the explanation. Emily learned the details later, in fragments, the way you assembled a picture when you weren't present for the central event. What she knew immediately was the text Kowalski sent her at 8:20. He's in custody. Material witness warrant executed. He's not going anywhere tonight. She was in the hallway outside room 718 when she read it. She stood there for a moment, just stood. The hallway was quiet, evening shift, reduced movement, the institutional hum of a building that was still running its basic functions even as the structure underneath it was being systematically dismantled. She went into 718. Logan was awake. Ruger looked up. "They have him," she said. Logan said nothing for a moment. Then, "Okay. Just that. Okay." The word that wasn't celebration and wasn't relief, it was acknowledgement. The sound a person made when a thing that needed to happen had happened, and the weight of it was real enough that marking it with more than one word would have been wrong. "Okay," Emily agreed. She sat down in the chair. Neither of them said anything for a while. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren moved through the Redstone night and faded. Ruger put his head on Logan's knee. Sandra Keyes came in the following morning at 9. She was 51, with the specific look of someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time and was simultaneously relieved to be putting it down and ashamed it had taken this long. Her attorney sat beside her. Odom led the questioning. Emily was not in the room for Keyes' statement. She had no reason to be, but Odom briefed her afterward with enough detail to fill in the shape of it. Keyes had been Aldgate's case manager for 6 years. She had been present for the initial decision, made in the second year of his tenure, to begin treating veteran service and emotional support animals as institutional liability items rather than clinical support tools. She had objected, formally, twice. The third time she'd prepared to object, Aldgate had called her into his office and offered her a choice, a termination package, or a consulting arrangement that would allow her to leave quietly with her reputation intact and her pension accelerating. She had taken the arrangement. She had told herself she would find another way to make it right. For 18 months, she had kept the documentation she'd retained from her time at the hospital. She had kept it in a folder on a hard drive that she brought to meetings with her attorney once a quarter to confirm it was still viable. She had made 3 attempts to report through official channels: the Ohio Department of Health, the hospital's accreditation body, the VA regional office, and had run into walls at all 3, partly because her former employer's legal team was experienced, and partly because the documentation she had was strong, but incomplete without testimony from patients who weren't coming forward. Until Garrett Sims showed up in the parking lot with a unit patch on his jacket and the particular expression of a man who has run out of places to direct his anger and pointed it, finally, at the right building. Until Emily arrived on the 4th floor and flagged a restraint order and refused to sedate a veteran before an unlawful removal. until the system produced, for once, an opening that was wide enough to walk through. What Keyes gave Odom that morning was 17 months of documented decisions, internal emails, and financial records that mapped the deliberate, systematic character of what Aldgate had built. It was not the story of an administrator who had made some bad calls under institutional pressure. It was the story of a director who had looked at a population of damaged, underserved patients, veterans who had been trained not to complain, who distrusted civilian systems, who often arrived without family advocates or legal representation, and had calculated that they were safe to mistreat because no one with sufficient authority was watching. He had been right about that for a long time. He had been wrong about Emily Carter. The charges were filed 11 days after Aldgate's custody. Rutherford Gaines, the board chair, was charged separately with obstruction and conspiracy to suppress a federal investigation based on the April emails his own board members had produced and on phone records showing 3 calls to Aldgate's personal cell in the 48 hours before the settlement offer had been constructed. 2 attending physicians who had signed falsified documentation, including the involuntary surrender notation in the 6th veteran's file, faced separate proceedings through the Ohio State Medical Board. Both had been pressured, both had complied, and the distinction between coercion and culpability was, as Emily understood it, one of the more complex legal arguments the case produced. She didn't have a clean opinion about them. What they'd done had caused harm. Why they'd done it was also true, and both things existed at the same time without canceling each other out. Aldgate's attorney entered a not guilty plea. This surprised no one. The trial, Odom told Emily in March, would likely be 8 months out. The evidence was extensive, and the defense was going to attempt to reframe every deliberate decision as institutional policy misapplication, which was the legal equivalent of painting a wall the same color as the damage so you couldn't see where the crack was. "Will it work?" Emily asked. "No," Odom said, with the specific flatness of someone who had read 17 months of documentation and had a clear view of the interior. "It won't work." Logan was transferred to Alton Military Medical Center on the 8th day. Emily drove up. She hadn't planned to. Marsh had arranged a medical transport, and Logan had not asked her to come. But she found herself in her car at 6:40 in the morning with the address already in her phone's navigation, and she drove. She got there before the transport. She stood in the parking lot of Alton Military Medical in the early light, which was a different quality of light than Redstone's, cleaner, higher, the kind that came with elevation and open land, and waited. The transport van pulled in at 7:50. Logan came out with Ruger beside him and a bag over one shoulder, and he moved differently than he had in the first days at Iron Ridge. Not fully well, that was months of work ahead of him, maybe more. And she was clear-eyed enough to know that the arc of recovery for people carrying what Logan carried was not linear and was not short. But he moved without the specific held-in tension of a man defending against a threat. His body had recalibrated slightly toward something that wasn't readiness to repel, just readiness. He saw her. He stopped. "You drove up," he said. "I drove up." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd never quite figured out how to name, the one that was past gratitude and not quite something else. The one that lived in the specific register of people who had been in hard places together and didn't need to perform what it meant. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." Ruger walked to her and pressed his nose into her hand, which she had not held out, but which he had apparently decided was the correct target regardless. She put her hand on his head. They walked into the facility together, and at the intake desk, Logan gave his information to a specialist who was precise and unhurried and called him Master Sergeant without being prompted, which was a small thing that was not small at all. Emily stayed for 2 hours. She met the program director, a retired Army physician named Dr. Arland Osai, who had the manner of someone who had spent 20 years getting very good at a specific kind of care that most of the medical system hadn't prioritized. He walked her through the facility. She asked questions that came from 6 years of combined military and nursing experience, and he answered them with the direct satisfaction of someone who rarely got asked the right questions. "We've been building this for 4 years," he said. "We have capacity for 22 patients. We have a waiting list of 63. Emily looked at him. "What's the bottleneck?" "Funding, staffing, And the fact that most civilian hospitals don't know we exist, so veterans who need this level of care get routed into general psychiatric settings that don't have the protocols. He paused. And when they get routed wrong, bad things happen. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way people did when they were deciding whether someone's understanding was theoretical or experiential. I heard about what happened at Iron Ridge, he said. Marsh told me some of it. The rest was in the federal press release. He paused again. You've been nursing for how long? 6 years total, 4 military, 2 civilian. And before that, combat medic. 2 Afghanistan rotations, 1 Iraq. He nodded slowly. We've been trying to hire someone who can bridge the civilian and military medical cultures, someone who understands both the clinical requirements and the field realities. He looked at her with the directness of a person who didn't have time for soft introductions. Are you staying at Iron Ridge? Iron Ridge is under federal oversight and administrative restructuring, she said. My position is technically restored, but what I'm going back to is not the same institution I was suspended from. That's a careful answer. It's an honest one. He looked at her for another moment. I'd like to have a real conversation with you about what we're building here. Not today. Today is for Hayes. But this week, if you're willing. She looked at the facility around her, the clean corridors, the natural light coming through windows that had been deliberately designed to allow it, the K9 exercise area visible through the glass at the far end of the wing where 2 dogs were running a loose pattern with a handler who was watching them with the focused ease of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for. Yes, she said. I'm willing. She found Logan before she left. He was in his room, a room with a window that faced east, which Marsh had apparently requested specifically, knowing that Logan preferred morning light, sitting on the edge of the bed with Ruger on the floor and a cup of coffee in his hands that he was drinking slowly, without urgency. How is it? She asked. Quiet, he said. Like it was a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. She stayed by the door. I spoke with Dr. Osei. He wants to talk to me about a position here. Logan looked at her. Something moved in his face that was slow and real. You'd leave Redstone? I don't know yet. I haven't decided. She paused. I'm considering it. You should take it, he said. Then he stopped himself. That's not, you know your life better than I do. No, say it. Why? He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Because you know how to do both things, the medical and the military. Most people can only do one, and they get better at it, but they can't translate it to the other side. He looked up. What happened at Iron Ridge? You were able to do what you did because you understood what Logan Hayes needed from a clinical perspective and what he needed from a soldier perspective at the same time. That's not a common thing. A pause. There are a lot of guys who need that and don't have it. She looked at him. And the other reason, he said. What's the other reason? Because Aldgate picked that building partly because he knew the people there weren't going to know what to do with us. The confusion about who we are, the way we present, it made it easy to mischaracterize. He set the cup down. You took away that confusion. You walked in and you understood, and that changed everything. If there were more people and more facilities who could do that, he shook his head. There wouldn't be a waiting list of 63 at a place like this. She stood with that for a moment. You didn't just save me, he said. It came out quieter than his other words, and without the distance that people sometimes put around important statements. You reminded me that someone could, that the system wasn't... He stopped, found the words. I'd stopped believing that anyone inside it was actually looking. She felt the weight of that in the specific way you felt things that were both true and too large to immediately respond to. I was looking, she said finally. I almost wasn't assigned to your room. But you were. But I was. They sat with that, the contingency of it, the fact that the difference between seen and unseen, between helped and failed, had been a charge nurse's assignment decision on a Tuesday morning. That Marcus Del Rey had not had an Emily Carter in March of last year, not because the system was uniformly cruel, but because it was uniformly careless, and carelessness at scale produced the same outcome as cruelty without requiring anyone to intend it. That was the thing that had kept her awake in the early hours for 10 nights running. Not Aldgate. He was comprehensible, his calculations were legible, the mechanism of his failure was clear. What kept her awake was the 63 people on the waiting list at a facility whose existence most civilian hospitals didn't know about, and the 100 behind them, and the institutions that would have to be rebuilt, not because they were malicious, but because they had never been designed with these people in mind. That was not a quick problem. That was a decade of work, minimum, and it would require people who understood both sides of the wall between military and civilian medicine, and it would fail in some places before it succeeded in others, and the successes would be incomplete, and the failures would cost something real. She knew all of this. She was choosing it anyway. Logan looked at Ruger, who had gotten up and was standing with his nose pointed toward the window and the eastern light coming in. "No veteran should ever have to fight alone after coming home," Logan said. He said it simply, like something he'd thought about for a long time. Not a slogan, a statement of something broken that needed fixing. Emily looked at him. "No, they shouldn't. You understand that most of them won't have someone like you." "I know. And you're going to try to change that?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Then go do that," he said, "and come back and tell me how it's going." 3 months later, Aldgate's trial began in federal court in Columbus. The evidence took 11 days to present. The defense's reframing strategy, institutional policy, clinical complexity, the ambiguity of documentation, ran into the specific problem that 17 months of Sandra Key's records did not leave much ambiguity. The emails were clear. The payment structure was clear. The sixth veteran, whose testimony the defense had attempted 3 times to suppress and failed, was clear. Garrett Sims testified on the 4th day. He sat in the witness box in a jacket with his unit patch visible, deliberately visible, Emily understood later, a decision he'd made in the parking lot that morning. And he answered every question in the flat, factual register of a man who had decided that precision was the most powerful thing he could bring into that room. He was not dramatic. He didn't need to be. The facts were dramatic enough without him reaching for anything. Emily testified on the 7th day. She had given formal statements, supplemental statements, recorded interviews. She had answered Odom's questions, and then the prosecutor's questions, and then a defense attorney's questions that were designed to suggest she had exceeded her clinical authority and acted from personal motivation rather than professional obligation. She had answered those questions too, with the same steadiness she'd been maintaining since the morning she'd walked into room 718 with Ruger watching her from across the room. "You were a combat medic," the defense attorney said. "Yes." "And you believe that experience informed your assessment of Mr. Hayes?" "It informed my ability to recognize what his presentation meant clinically." "Yes, and you believed, based on that assessment, that you were better qualified to determine the appropriate course of care than the attending physician." She looked at him. "I believe the restraint order was outdated and the patient was not presenting as a clinical risk. That's a nursing assessment, not a physician override. I documented it and flagged it for review. That's standard procedure." "But you refused to comply with the removal order." "I refused to participate in what I assessed as an illegal procedure. That's a different thing." The defense attorney moved on. His questions were designed to create a picture of Emily as a rogue actor, someone who had elevated her own judgment above institutional authority out of personal identification with the patient. She answered each one with the documentation she had generated at the time, not retrospectively, not in the aftermath of Marcia's arrival, but in real time, before she had any confirmation that she was right. That was the part that kept coming back. She had acted before the outcome was visible. She had refused the catch poll and called Aldgate's bluff, and documented everything and kept showing up to work not because she'd known the military was coming, or that the investigation would follow, or that the board would eventually vote the way it voted. She had done it because the alternative was to walk out of room 718 knowing what she knew and do nothing, and she was constitutionally unable to do that. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They came back with a verdict on a Thursday morning in November, 8 months after the night in the Milford gas station. Guilty on 4 counts. Systematic violation of federal veteran protection statutes. Deliberate falsification of medical documentation. Conspiracy to suppress a federal investigation. Retaliatory personnel action against a federally protected witness. Rutherford Gaines had already pleaded guilty to obstruction in a separate proceeding, in exchange for sentencing consideration that his attorney had argued for and a judge had granted with visible reluctance. Aldgate received a federal sentence of 6 years. Gaines received 3 years probation and a permanent bar from serving in any healthcare administrative capacity. His attorney had argued hard for that outcome. Whether it was adequate was a question Emily turned over for a few days and eventually set down, not because she'd resolved it, but because the resolution wasn't available to her and spending energy on it was not useful. The 2 physicians who had signed falsified documentation received 18-month suspensions from the medical board. They would be allowed to reapply for licensure after that period with conditions attached. Emily had one opinion about this, that she kept private and a separate professional understanding that the board had applied its process and the process was not hers to control. The hospital's psychiatric department was placed under full federal oversight for a period of 24 months, with an independent clinical director appointed to oversee structural reforms. The veteran-patient caseload was transferred to a partnership arrangement with Alton Military Medical for the duration. 3 of the 5 surviving veterans who had experienced unlawful removals, including Garrett Sims, received formal settlements from the hospital. The 4th was still in negotiation. The 5th had declined to participate in any legal process, which was his right, and Emily hoped he was okay in the only way you could hope for someone you'd never met and had no way to reach. The case of Marcus Del Rey was settled separately, with his father, Arthur Pell. Emily was not present for that meeting. She did not know its terms, which were private. What she knew was that Odom called her afterward and said simply, "It's done. He has what he needs to move forward." And that was enough. She took the position at Alton Military Medical in January. It was a title she'd helped design with Osei over 4 conversations spread across 3 months, each one longer than the last, each one moving the idea further from vague into specific. Veteran Transition Care Coordinator, with a clinical practice component and a training component and a policy component that would involve working with other facilities across the state to develop protocols that actually fit the population they were supposed to serve. It was not a clean role. It was going to require her to be in rooms with administrators who did not want to change their documentation systems, and physicians who resented the implication that they were doing something wrong, and institutional inertia that was not malicious but was as effective as malice in producing the same bad outcomes. She knew all of this going in. On her first morning at Alton, she arrived at 7:15, which was early. She walked through the facility once before the day started, the long east-facing wing, the K9 area where 2 handlers were already running morning protocol, the intake suite where 4 new patients were scheduled to arrive before noon. She stood at the window of the east wing and watched the morning light do what it did in that space, the specific clean quality of it, and thought about the fact that she was here because she had knocked twice on a door in a building 46 miles south and waited. She thought about the people on the waiting list. It was 51 now, down from 63, because the partnership with Iron Ridge had opened some capacity, but 51 was still 51. And about the other facilities, the other Aldgates who might not be deliberate in the way Aldgate had been, but who were careless in ways that produced the same outcomes, and about the work that was ahead. She did not think the work was going to be fast. She did not think it was going to be clean. She thought it was going to require a long time and a lot of patience and the specific kind of persistence that was not passionate and dramatic, but was just showing up on the days when showing up was the only available option and doing it anyway. She had been doing that her whole professional life. She knew how. Logan was in the K9 exercise area when she found him. He was watching Ruger run a tracking pattern, not directing, just watching, the way handlers did when they were letting the dog work without interruption. Ruger moved through the course with the fluid, purposeful attention of an animal doing what it had been built for. His coat caught the morning light. His nose was down, then up, reading. Logan heard her coming. He had the awareness that didn't fully switch off, the particular quality of attention that 6 months of treatment had softened at the edges but not removed, because removal wasn't the goal and wouldn't have been right even if it were possible. He had simply, over 6 months, learned to live alongside it rather than be driven by it. He looked at her sideways. First day. How are you feeling? She considered the question honestly. Like there's a lot of work ahead and not enough time, and some of it is going to fail in ways I can't predict yet. He almost smiled. Yeah. Welcome to every operation I've ever run. Did that stop you from running them? No. Then, he looked back at Ruger. The dog had found the end marker and sat with his tail doing a slow, satisfied sweep. I'm going to be here for another 2 months, Logan said. Osei says maybe longer, depending. That's fine. You should take what you need. After that, he paused. Marsh is talking about a consulting role, training program, veteran to civilian medical transition. She wants someone who has been through the wrong version of it and the right version. That sounds like something you'd be good at. Maybe. A pause. I don't know yet. I'm trying not to make decisions about after until I've finished now. That was wisdom she recognized. Not the clean packaged kind that showed up in motivational language, but the functional kind, earned through enough experience of what happened when you didn't do it. Ruger trotted back to Logan's side. He looked up at Emily with his ears cocked in her direction, assessing, and then he looked back at Logan as if to say, "We good?" And Logan put his hand on the dog's head without looking down. You know what I keep thinking about, Logan said. What? That Tuesday morning, when you knocked twice. He was looking at the exercise field. I had been in that room for 8 days. 6 different staff members had come through that door. I wasn't able to engage with any of them in a way that... He stopped. And then you knocked twice and waited. Field hospital protocol, she said. Hypervigilant entry announcement. I know what it was. That's the point. He looked at her. You knew what it was, so you did it, and I knew what it was. And for the first time in 8 days, I felt like someone in that building was speaking the same language. He was quiet for a moment. It's such a small thing. Yes, but it's everything. Yes, she said. That's the whole problem. It's the small things, and nobody's been teaching them systematically, and people keep being surprised when it matters. He nodded. So you're going to teach them. I'm going to try. Ruger looked up at both of them, then lay down in a patch of morning sun with the specific contentment of an animal that had found a location that was exactly right. Emily looked at the two of them, the man who had come back from a series of places that would never fully leave him, and the dog who had stayed beside him through all of it, and the morning light coming in clean and clear across a facility that was imperfect and underfunded and had a waiting list of 51 people and was still the best version of this thing that existed in the state of Ohio. She thought about what it cost people to come home. Not the visible cost, the injuries, the diagnoses, the things that showed up in charts, but the invisible cost, the one that accumulated in the gap between who you had been asked to be in service and what the civilian world offered when you returned. The gap between the language people spoke over there and the language people spoke here, and the people who fell into that gap because nobody had built a bridge. She had spent 6 years doing medicine in 2 different worlds, and what she understood now, not theoretically but in the actual lived weight of it, was that the bridge was the work. Not the dramatic intervention, not the moment in the hallway when you said stop in the voice that came from your diaphragm. Those moments mattered, but they were downstream of something more fundamental. The daily, unspectacular decision to learn the language of the person in front of you and speak it back. That was what she was going to do here. Day after day, with paperwork and resistant administrators and insufficient funding and 51 people on a waiting list. She was going to do it imperfectly and inconsistently, and on days when she was tired and on days when the work felt like trying to move something too heavy for one person to move. And she was going to keep going because she understood now, had always understood, but understood more completely, that the alternative was not doing it. And not doing it was not a neutral choice. Not doing it had a body count, quiet and uncounted, in the hospitals and the discharge records and the fathers who drove 4 hours to stand in a lobby because nobody had told them their son's death meant something to someone in an official capacity. She was not going to be the person who walked that father out. She was not going to be any version of the person who walked anyone out. Logan looked at her. You're going to be good at this, he said, not as a compliment, as an assessment, the way he stated all his assessments. Probably not at first, she said honestly. No, not at first. He looked back at the field. But you'll learn it. Ruger got up from his patch of sun and shook himself once, ears flopping, and then looked up at Logan with the expectant attention of a dog who had determined that rest time was over. Logan looked down at him. Something in his face was the closest it had ever been to ease. "Come on," he said to the dog. And Ruger walked beside him into the morning, and Emily stood at the edge of the exercise field watching them go, and she thought, this is what honor actually looks like. Not the ceremony, not the citation, but this. The decision to stay, the decision to keep going, the refusal to let someone disappear into the gap. She had made that decision in a doorway on a Tuesday, and it had cost her things and given her things and changed her in ways she was still accounting for. She would make it again tomorrow and the day after. And on every day when the work was hard and the progress was invisible and the only available move was to show up and do the thing that needed doing. No veteran should have to fight alone after coming home. She intended to spend a considerable portion of her life making sure fewer of them did.